It was a lot of pressure to resolve the case very quickly.
Details in that Idaho college murder case. A just unsealed search warrant is giving us insight into what investigators took from suspect Bryan Kohberger's apartment: a computer, receipts, and some reddish-stained items. Here's CBS's Lilia Luciano.
The records show that investigators seized a black nitrite glove, the dust container from Bryan Kohberger's vacuum cleaner, about a dozen possible human hair strands, an item with a dark red spot, and a stained mattress cover, plus a pillow showing a reddish-brown stain. The documents do not say what testing on those items revealed.
What investigators would be looking for is anything that directly ties the offender to the crime scene. Any item of physical evidence that might have some type of DNA on it.
In the search warrant, officers say, based on the locations of the suspect vehicle and the suspect's phone immediately following the murders, it is probable that Kohberger went home after the killing. And it is likely that he still had blood or other trace evidence on his person, including skin cells or hair from the victims or from Kaylee Gonsalves's dog. Kohberger is charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of students Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Xanaker Nodal, and Ethan Chapin.
The more they report useless information, the more I think back to the accused Atlanta bomber during the Olympics. The unsealment of the seized items during the search did little to appease my apprehension as to whether or not they had the right guy. Thinking about the case outside of the internet and the media's rush to judgment, it just defies logic that Bryan would have committed these murders without transferring any trace evidence to the car, especially considering they believe it to be the getaway vehicle. Then when thinking of the cell phone pinging of the towers close to the victim's home, well, Moscow only has 3 towers. They are all near the victim's home. I just pray that the judicial system got it right, because getting it wrong and apologizing would never compensate for what this young man and his family are going through. Take a look at this video up next and see firsthand the effects it has on innocent people when we allow the media to hold court by public opinion. Until next video, stay safe and may God bless us all.
Welcome to Atlanta's Olympic Stadium for the opening ceremony of these Centennial Olympic Games.
In the early morning of July 27, 1996, more than 100 people were injured and 1 killed by a bomb blast at Atlanta's Centennial Olympic Park.
After the bombing had occurred, the victims were taken away. I remember very distinctly, as the light came up, I started meeting some of the people around in the area, and one of the people on the scene was Richard Jewell.
Jewell, a former sheriff's deputy, had discovered the bomb in a backpack and helped clear the area before the explosion. He was hailed a hero.
And I just hope that we catch the people that did it.
Following the bombing, there were a lot of suspects, but it wasn't too far into the investigation where Richard Jewell's name started surfacing.
The president of a college where Jewell had worked security called the FBI to say he had concerns about Jewell. A check into Jewell's background revealed other witnesses who reported he had a history of employment problems and was obsessed with law enforcement.
Our profilers from Quantico were watching the shows and saying, we've had instances in the recent past where police officers invented situations so that they could be the heroes. He started to have that look about him. We've got the Olympic Games going on. We're concerned that whoever did it may do it again if we don't get hold of them.
It was a lot of pressure to resolve the case very quickly.
The assumption was that everyone would keep everything confidential because of the importance of the investigation. In hindsight, that was naive because people like to talk.
An unidentified law enforcement source leaked Jewell's name to Ron Martz's reporting partner, Kathy Scruggs.
It was important for us as the hometown paper to try to verify as soon as possible and put that information out on the street.
Word quickly reached investigators.
It sped up the timetable in the investigation on what the investigators wanted to do to try to get to Richard Jewell before his name was all over creation. Law enforcement really wanted to talk with Richard Jewell, either to find out if he did it or to clear him.
We wanted to create an environment, if we brought him in for an interview, where he would be comfortable.
So when two agents went to talk to Jewell and he expressed concerns about being interviewed on videotape, they told him it would be used in a training film for first responders. He then agreed to come to Atlanta's FBI office.
I don't think they were very far into the interview when I received a phone call from the director. And the director said, I want you to stop the interview to warn him of his rights. Do it now. And so I instructed the assistant special agent in charge to knock on the door.
Alexander later saw on videotape what happened next.
The investigation was going along as if it was a training video for a first responder. At a point, the investigators just said, we want to make this as realistic as possible, or something to that effect. We're even going to read you the Miranda rights. And as they start, the camera's on Richard Jewell, and his eyes widen a little bit, and it's like there's a cartoon character light going off on top, and you realize he's saying, wait a minute, am I a suspect?
FBI has a suspect. Read all about it.
The news had already hit the streets when from inside the FBI office, Jewell called a friend who was a lawyer.
I asked him if he'd read the newspaper. He said no, he hadn't, so I read him the headline. And I said, man, they think you did it. Asked him if he was under arrest, and they said no, he was not. And I said, great, then he's leaving.
I remember saying to my editor, this man's life will never be the same, simply because he suddenly was in the eye of this media storm.
Are they letting you go to work? They're letting you go to work, you're free to go. Did they tell you now not to leave town? No. Can you categorically say that you did not do this? I did not do it. Categorically. Yes.
Television cameras surrounded Jewell's apartment as federal agents searched for evidence.
It created a circus environment, I'm sure, anger with his attorney, but we had a responsibility to try to figure out whether he was involved.
Some of the coverage, while acknowledging that Jewell was only under investigation, still cast him in the worst possible light.
The hero may be a possible villain.
You get a different picture of Richard Jewell in these North Georgia mountains. He lived alone in this rented home with his Doberman dogs, most days with the blinds drawn.
But behind the scenes, a few investigators had doubts.
I had one of my agents, and I believe an FBI agent, redo and watch the interviews in detail. And my agent came to me, and the first thing he said was, this guy didn't do it.
His attorney, whether I agree with it or not, did not want to cooperate at all with us. It hurt our ability to resolve Richard Jewell in a timely manner. It made him a victim. It didn't make us look very good either.
Still tailed by FBI agents and unable to get a job, his only source of income is now a telephone hotline.
2 months after Jewell was identified, he was offered a deal. If he answered investigators' questions, he could be cleared.
Once Richard Jewell did come in, it became very apparent over the next few weeks that there's no reason to charge him.
How y'all doing?
Richard Jewell finally got what he's been waiting for. A hand-delivered letter from the Justice Department says, based on the evidence developed to date, Jewell is not considered a target of a federal investigation.
After he was cleared of suspicion, several FBI agents were reprimanded, including the agent who read Jewell his Miranda rights during the ruse. Jewell pursued legal action against several news organizations, citing, among other things, a column that implied a comparison between Jewell and a convicted murderer, and another called him a fat, failed former sheriff's deputy.
Here's Richard Jewell, the 114th victim of the Atlanta Olympic bombing.
This is the first time I have ever asked you to turn your cameras on me. For 88 days, I lived a nightmare. For 88 days, my mother lived a nightmare too. And it's rushed for the headline that the hero was the bomber. The media cared nothing for my feelings as a human being.
NBC, CNN, and the New York Post were among those which settled for undisclosed sums. But the Atlanta Journal-Constitution fought the case for 15 years and won.
There's no way that anybody can convince me that we libeled Richard Jewell. The information we printed was that he was the focus of the